Hello everybody and welcome back. In this we are going to talk about how to make our game a little bit more interactive and allow the player to go around in the level and pick up objects. So in order to do this, we will implement two things, using input and then implementing collisions so that we could determine whether the player is within the vicinity of our object to pick them up. So in this video, we are going to cover axis and action mapping. So at first, I'm going to give you a little introduction about what we are going to cover in this video. Then we learn about axis mapping and action mapping. And these are the two main primary ways that Unreal Engine allows you to utilize input in your game. And the input could be either a continuous input or a discrete input. And that makes the input to be either an axis map or an action map. Then in the next video, we are going to set up collisions, and the combination of these two videos will be the effect of allowing our player to pick up magic pills. So as I mentioned, we have axis and action mapping as the two main particular ways that we could interact with objects in the scene and provide input to our system. First, we are going to learn about axis mapping and action mapping and how they are done. In particular, we're going to look at our character that already has axis and action mapping implemented. And then we are going to set up our own action mapping to toggle a pickup mode for our player. Basically, in the pickup mode off, the player will not be able to pick up objects in the scene when he or she gets close to them. And when we toggle pickup mode on, then the player could pick up objects in the scene. And then we bind the action mapping. So let's get started to implement our action mapping. Now, before we get started, let me show you what happens when we finish the process of action and axis mapping and implement and set up our collisions, how our game would look like. So this would be the original game that we had. And as you see from the previous videos, when you enter the spawning volume, new magic pills are going to be spawned. Now, what we want to do is we want to have a mode that allows the player to pick up objects or to ignore objects. So we are going to set up this pickup mode, and whenever you press the key E on the keyboard, you will basically set this mode on and off. So when the toggle is off, meaning that you can't pick up objects and you get close to the objects, nothing really happens. But when you set the toggle on and then you get close to these magic pills, you basically pick them up. And as you see here, whenever I'm getting close to these magic pills, I just simply pick them up. And if I want to toggle off, I just press E again, and now whenever my player gets to the magic pills, it just completely ignores them and just goes by them. So this is how our end result of these videos will look like once we implemented our action mapping to pick up, or rather to toggle the mode on and off, and implemented our collision so that we can see which object we are close to. So with that, let's get started. So first thing we are going to do is to learn where these action and axis mapping are and how we can utilize these. So for now, I'm going to show you where you can set up these action and axis mappings and show you where some of these action and axis mapping are already implemented. And then we're going to build onto that. So if you click on the settings in the editor, you would see a setting called project setting. When you click on the project setting, it'll take you to the menu that allows you to set up certain aspects of your project. And under the Engine tab, there is a tab called Input. And if you click on the Input tab, by default, probably the action mappings and the axis mappings are going to be collapsed. And these are where the functionalities for your action mapping and axis mapping are going to be declared. And then in code, you can implement those functionalities. So the difference between action mapping and axis mapping is that one is a discrete action, meaning that whenever a key is pressed, an event is going to be triggered. And it works at discrete intervals. It's kind of like if you wanted to jump. You press space, your character jumps. But the amount of time that you hold the space bar pressed doesn't have any effect on the jump. Axis mapping, on the other hand, you can think of it as a continuous operation in that, for example, when you want to move your character forward, you press the key W, and then while the key W is pressed, your character would keep moving forward. So it's more of a continuous action on axis mapping, whereas the action mapping is more of a discrete type of action. So for now, you would notice that if you expand by clicking on the little triangle next to action and axis mapping, there are two action mapping implemented, jump and reset VR, and then there are 6 axis mapping implemented, move forward, move right, turn rate, turn, lookup rate, and lookup. And if you expand each of these, you would see what keys or what components from input devices are associated to each of these action or axis mappings. So the first thing you need to do when you wanted to set up a new action or axis mapping is to decide whether it is an action or an axis map, and then add the action or axis map here in the editor and determine what keys or what input to be associated with it. And then once you did that, then you can go to the code and bind the action or axis mappings appropriately. So as you see here, we have 2 action maps, jump and reset VR, and then 6 axis mappings. And if you go to the code and open up your character.cpp file, and then go and find the setup player input component function, you would see that this function basically binds those action or axis mappings to the appropriate function that you want to be called when such a key or input is pressed or provided. So in the setup player component, you're going to first check the player input component and then bind actions jump that is basically invoked when the jump key is pressed. And it's going to run on this character, and it's going to call up the function jump of our character. So here's how you basically bind the action mappings to your character. In terms of axis mapping, the function is different. It's called bind axis. And then notice here the quotation marks. The names are the names of the action or axis mapping you had, such as jump or move forward or move right. And then whatever functionality or whatever function you want to be called upon when such an action or axis mapping occurs. So we are going to do this and add our action mapping to enable our character to press the key E. And once that key is pressed, we are going to toggle a mode on or off, which is going to be a Boolean variable. And we're going to toggle it on or off to allow our player to be able to interact and pick up objects and interact with the magic pills. So we're going to go to the basic character.h, and then in the basic character.h, we are going to just simply go ahead, and for now, we are going to add a Boolean variable. And this Boolean variable is going to be our mode for toggling pickup effect or not. So we're going to create a Boolean, and we're going to call it pickup mode. And this Boolean variable will enable us to toggle on or off for our player to be able to pick up objects. Once we set this up, we are going to go in the character implementation file, and we're going to look for our character's constructor. And in the constructor, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, towards the end, doesn't matter where, in the constructor, I'm going to set the pickup mode false. So our character starts out in having its pickup mode false. So the pickup mode is off. So at start, pickup is off. Now we're going to create an action mapping and map it to the key E. And when you press the key E, it toggles on, off your mode to be able to pick up objects. And then we're going to use that in the next video when we set up the collisions for the character to collide with objects and pick the magic pills. So we're going to go back to our editor, and then again, just to show you where to find the action or axis mappings, you click on settings, you click on project settings, and then you scroll down to find the input tab. And I want to create an action mapping, so I'm going to click on the plus sign next to the action mapping, and we are going to call this action mapping pickup, and we're going to associate to it from the keyboard the key E. And you could set whether you want the shift to be pressed or control or alt or command on Mac devices with the E for the action to happen. So once you do this, you close the project setting, and now you have created the action mapping for key E to be pressed. Next, we are going to have to bind this in our player input component functionality. So we're going to go back to our Visual Studio, and this time we're going to scroll and look for set up player component input component function. And this is, as you see, where all these bindings are happening. So I'm going to then bind my action. So I'm going to say player input bind action. And what I want this to be, I call this in my action mapping, Let me just go back and make sure. I call it pick up. Let's call it actually picking up, more appropriate name, picking up for this action mapping to be called. Then we are going to bind this action mapping with the name picking up, and it's going to be on the IE pressed for this character, and the name of the function that I'm going to associate to this action is going to be pick objects. So obviously, I'm going to have to create this pick objects function for my character. So we're going to go back to the Unreal Basic Scripting character.h file, and we are going to create this void function called pick objects. So back on the CPP file, I bound the picking up action mapping to the pick objects function that I have in my character, and it's called pick objects function. So next, we are going to have to implement this function. So we go back to our Unreal Scripting Basic character, and in here, we are going to implement it. So it's a void function from Unreal Basic Character Pickup Objects. And in this function, I'm going to basically, whenever key E is pressed, as I said, I want to toggle the mode on and off. So I basically set the picking up mode to be the negative of itself. So the first time you press E, it's going to be true, then false, then true, then false. So if each time you press E, it's going to toggle your pickup mode to be pick up on, pick up off, pick up on, pick up off. Then I'm going to notify the player as to what their pickup mode is. Basically, check to see if pickup mode is on. Then I'm going to write on the screen in color blue, which will stay for about 3 seconds, the string picking mode toggled on. And obviously, if that weren't the case, the pickup mode was off, I'm going to write on the screen for the player that picking up mode is toggled off. And this is all I need to do. So if I compile my code and if I didn't make any syntax error, I should be able to toggle my picking mode on and off that then I can use in game in conjunction with collision to set my mode on or off to pick up objects. So as you see, I'm starting out, and when I press E, pickup mode is toggled on, and then when I press E again, the pickup mode is toggled off. You press E again, the pickup mode is toggled on, the pickup mode is toggled off. So now this functionality is set up. Now I can use this functionality and set up collisions for my magic pills so that they can collide with my actor and then pick these objects up.